Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating textual analysis by Coach Bruyns. This analysis attempts to separate deeply ingrained cultural myths from literal Quranic law regarding marriage and gender dynamics. It's a deep dive, and whether you're super familiar with these texts or completely new to them, we're going to see exactly how ancient words literally shape social order.
To really grasp this complex topic, we're going to follow the chronological life cycle of a marriage. We'll start with translating the terminology, look at consent and forced marriage, dive into the marriage contract, and finally, break down the specific rights of both the wives and the men.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Translating the Terminology, where we'll decode the original Arabic text. Now, there's a massive, and I mean massive, translation error that often pops up right from the start with the Arabic word nisa. While it's frequently translated strictly as wives, the author points out it actually translates to women in a much broader sense. This completely shifts the legal and historical context of verses addressing the prophet, because it recognizes that his household included not just legally wedded wives, but concubines as well. Building on that, the source draws a hard line between these two terms. Nisa refers to all permissible women, whereas azwaj refers exclusively and specifically to wives. The author argues that the Quran uses highly specific vocabulary for very specific purposes. So when translators or scholars accidentally conflate these two terms, it can lead to some deeply flawed legal judgments. And this brilliantly illustrates the dual nature of marriage in the text. Take a look at the term nikah. The author explains that this word isn't just about a formal piece of paper. In the text, nikah encompasses the legal engagement of the marriage contract and the physical consummation of sexual relations. It's the whole shebang, both a legal and a physical reality. Moving right along to Section 2, Consent and Forced Marriage. It's time to separate myth from textual reality. The source firmly points out a huge divide here. While certain cultural traditions around the world often force young people into arranged marriages, sometimes using familial pressure or the threat of being disowned, the actual text strictly forbids this. Citing verse 419, the author notes it is completely unlawful to inherit or take women by compulsion. A woman's explicit free will consent is an absolute textual requirement. No exceptions. So you might be wondering, can a child actually consent? Well, according to this textual analysis, absolutely not. The text inextricably links marriage with the intellectual maturity required to manage wealth. To be legally married, the source states one must have physical maturity, known as baligh, and aqil, which means sanity and sound judgment. Without that adult maturity, the contract is literally invalid. Okay, Section 3, the marriage contract. Let's look at the actual rules of engagement. According to the source, these are the 3 absolute conditions to validate a marriage contract. You need mutual offer and acceptance, adulthood and sanity, and permissible partners. And what's super fascinating here is the author's strict definition of marrying a person of the book. It doesn't just mean anybody claiming to be Christian or Jewish. The text actually specifies it must be someone who actively follows their own scripture's dietary and modesty laws. It's all about shared values of chastity. Which naturally brings us to a big question. If marriage is both this physical act and a binding contract, what specific rights and protections does it actually guarantee? Let's see how the text actively balances the scales of gender dynamics once the marriage begins. That brings us to Section 4, Rights of the Wives. We're talking maintenance, protection, and fairness.
The source views the marital covenant as deeply mutual and highly protective of women. The distinct rights guaranteed to wives cover financial maintenance, physical protection, the right to intimacy, and an overarching umbrella of fair treatment. Let's break a few of these down, because they're really crucial.
What you should take away from this is that the rule of male financial support isn't entirely rigid. The author points out a lot of nuance in the text. While maintenance is predominantly the husband's duty, it adapts if the woman possesses her own wealth. A great historical example cited here is the prophet's first wife, Khadijah. She was a wealthy merchant who maintained her own financial independence.
When it comes to how spouses treat each other, the source heavily emphasizes the word ma'ruf. So, fairness isn't just some one-size-fits-all metric. Ma'ruf means acting according to what is customary and expected. It inherently allows couples to dynamically negotiate the terms of their relationship based on mutual consent and their own unique circumstances.
Now, take a look at this number. 4 months. This is the maximum length of time classical scholars logically quantified that a man can legally stay away from his wife's bed. The source highlights this to really emphasize that a woman's right to sexual gratification and intimacy is strictly protected. A husband cannot lawfully abandon his wife physically while keeping her trapped in a marriage.
Of course, to remain completely impartial and truly understand this text, we have to look at how the author actively decodes one of the most heavily debated verses regarding gender dynamics.
The explainer highlights that a critical mistake is reading verse 434 as an individual mandate. The author argues it's actually a plural address. It states that men collectively protect women in society. Therefore, the disciplinary actions mentioned are interpreted not as an endorsement of individual domestic abuse, no way, but as a reference to communal governance. It's about maintaining broad societal law against a collective rebellion that threatens social order.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Rights of the Men, Authority and Accountability.
According to the analysis, because men bear the ultimate physical and societal accountability, we're talking about the duty to fight wars, defend borders, and provide overarching safety, they are allotted corresponding authority and leadership within the family structure. This includes the right to obedience in lawful matters and the ability to dynamically negotiate household duties.
This quote right here gets straight to the heart of the author's thesis. The text deliberately differentiates male and female roles. The argument presented is that the text actively avoids burdening women with the heavy, violent burdens of societal-level accountability, like war, so they can focus on the foundational unit of society, the home and family.
The source ultimately envisions a complementary, rather than identical, partnership. The women's domain focuses internally on the family and personal finance, while the men's domain focuses externally on broad societal order and physical defense. The author concludes that trying to make these roles exactly the same actually breaks down the intended social order.
It's a really provocative thought to end on, isn't it? This ancient text maps out a highly specific contract of mutual rights, financial duties, and societal roles. Perhaps understanding the literal, contractual roots of these laws reveals exactly what might be missing in the often vague commitments of modern relationships. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped you unpack this incredibly complex topic.